In this lesson, I want to show you how both of the elements from the array returned by useState work. So I want to show you both the first element and the second element in action. So as we know from basic JSX syntax, we can interpolate any value that we want within our returned JSX by using curly braces. So for example, what I can do here is remove this value of some JSX, and I can replace it with something like email. Now, currently, we're not going to see anything on screen because email is going to be an empty string. But if I change this to something like test@email, that is going to be a starter value, the initial value. So now when I save this and I scroll down, we're going to see test@email.com appear. So the first element in the array that useState returns is the current value for that piece of state. The current value for our email piece of state is test@email.com, and I am rendering it using the exact same syntax that we're used to, and that's why we're seeing it right here on our screen, right? Now, of course, as it currently stands, there is nothing to enable us to change this email to something new, which will cause a re-render. The way we change that state value is by using the complementary setter function, which is going to be the second element in that array. So for us, that function, we have assigned a name of setEmail to. But I can't simply use setEmail in line here. I need kind of a scenario under which it's going to happen. Typically, this is going to be something like a user click. But I can give you a simulated scenario, and you do not have to follow along. This is just for the sake of example. There is an available function in JavaScript called setTimeout. And all that this does is it runs a function after a given amount of time. The first argument to this function is its own function that represents what we're going to run. So here I'm going to provide an arrow function. And the second argument is a duration of time in milliseconds. So for example, if I put 3000 here, that is 3000 milliseconds, which is equivalent to 3 seconds. So the way this works is in 3 seconds, JavaScript will run whatever logic I put in the body of this function. That is the first argument. So what I'm going to do in the body of this function is I'm going to use setEmail, my setter function, and I'm going to give it another arbitrary value. So for example, let's do Ernie@sesamestreet.com. Okay, so the way this is going to work when I save the file is our component is going to initialize, and its initial value for the email state is going to be test@email.com, which is what we're going to render on line 14. Then in 3 seconds, I'm going to get setEmail to run and set the new value of the email state to be Ernie@sesamestreet.com. Just like in class-based components, whenever any piece of state changes, React will re-render the component and re-render the JSX that we are returning. So now the email constant right here will no longer be test@email. It will be Ernie@sesamestreet.com, and that will be reflected in the DOM, in the actual user interface. All right. Typically, we wouldn't do this, and we will explore more about the setTimeout function in a section a little bit later in the course. So don't worry if you don't get everything right here. The key takeaway here is that I am using the setter function to update a piece of state in 3 seconds to show you that when we use that setter function and we update it, the state will update and thus cause a re-render. I'm trying to prove to you here that this works the exact same way as it does in a class component whenever we use this.setState. The state changes, that forces a re-render, which changes the UI. So when I save this, pay attention to the file on the right. Here I go. Right now it's test@email.com, and in a few seconds you can see it changes to Ernie@sesamestreet.com. Let me refresh to re-trigger this event, and we can observe it once again. Right now we have the initial value, test, and now it changes to Ernie@sesamestreet.com on the bottom left of my screen. That's just to show you how both of these values in the array work. The first one is the current value for the state. The second value is a function to update that current state value. And we can do that change whenever we want and as many times as we want. But typically, it's going to be on user interaction, right? We don't want to typically change the value of state just 3 seconds in arbitrarily. We typically want to do it when the user does something like fill out an input field or click a button, etc. All right. So this was just for the sake of example. So I'm going to remove this setTimeout code right here, and we can leave off with this state of our component. All right, that's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I will see you in the next one.